What if the way you thought about time profoundly shaped not just your day, but the very future of our planet? We often perceive time as just, a simple, unyielding, linear progression, like a clock ticking forward, right? Each moment gone once it passes. But is that truly the only way to experience it? And what implications does that perception hold for our deepest responsibilities? Today, we're taking a deep dive into an extraordinary stack of sources that challenge this conventional understanding of time. We'll explore the multifaceted concept of responsibility, from ancient wisdom all the way to modern ethics. And ultimately, we want to invite you to consider your profound role as a steward of your own finite time, of your community, and yeah, of the Earth itself. We'll unpack philosophical insights, historical perspectives, and even some surprisingly practical applications. Our sources span environmental ethics, ancient wisdom, modern management theory. It's quite a mix. Our mission today is to leave you not just informed, but maybe, just maybe, with a transformed lens through which to view your place in, well, everything. We'll begin by delving into how different cultures and philosophies perceive time, moving far beyond that simple ticking clock. Because as you'll discover, understanding these diverse temporal frameworks can unlock entirely new ways of thinking about our obligations and our connections. Okay, so we're so conditioned, aren't we, to see time in this one particular way, just a straight line marching forward, past, present, future. It feels like this relentless, quantified march from one second to the next. But what if that linear view is just, well, one lens, and stepping outside it could unlock entirely new insights, revealing different rhythms to life?
It's really fascinating how deeply ingrained this linear perception of time is for so many of us. It feels almost like a universal, immutable constant. Yet, as our sources really bring out, this linear view is far from universal, not at all. Other cultural and philosophical perspectives offer these incredibly rich alternatives that just fundamentally challenge our assumptions. And they invite a much broader understanding of how time shapes our reality, our culture, our habits, and our very sense of connection to the world around us.
And nowhere is this more vividly illustrated than in indigenous conceptions of time. We've all sort of heard that indigenous cultures view time differently, right? And our sources absolutely confirm this. It's not presented as just a subtle variation, but as a really fundamental reorientation. Vine Deloria, who is a really influential indigenous scholar and activist, speaks directly to this core difference. He highlights that indigenous conceptions of time are often deeply cyclical, contrasting really sharply with what he terms the straight line of Anglo-American time.
Precisely. And let's take the Mescalero Apache, for example. Yeah. This is explored beautifully in the book Thunder Rides a Black Horse. For them, time isn't primarily dictated by, say, an abstract clock or some arbitrary hour we've set. Instead, it's based exclusively on the organic, observable movement of celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, the stars.
Right. So the day doesn't begin at a fixed time like 12 a.m.
Exactly. It genuinely starts when the sun breaks the horizon. Just imagine that shift in consciousness. Instead of glancing at a device on your wrist, you're looking up at the sky. You're actively engaging with the sun, the moon, the stars. This isn't just a different way of scheduling. It's about feeling constantly viscerally connected.
A feeling of connectivity, as the source puts it.
Yes, to the larger world, to the rhythms of nature, plants, animals. Honestly, to how most of humanity lived for most of history.
And this celestial timekeeping, as beautifully integrated as it sounds, it creates very real, often heartbreaking conflicts when it clashes with, westernized, industrialized society. Our source points out how vital observing stars is for young Apache. It means late nights are needed to acquire crucial cultural knowledge. And this immediately puts them in an impossible bind, right? Either attend standard school hours and miss out on invaluable cultural education passed down through generations.
Or pursue that profound knowledge and inevitably fall behind in school.
Or try to do both and end up just severely sleep deprived.
Yeah, in any of those scenarios, they suffer, either culturally losing touch with their heritage or biologically just from chronic lack of rest. It really underscores how imposing one dominant time system can lead to profound disconnections and hardships for those who live by another rhythm.
It's a powerful and, yeah, often tragic illustration of that cultural collision.
It's also worth noting, that even pre-industrial Western societies had a more integrated celestial understanding of time. Think about noon. Originally, that was simply when the sun was at its highest point.
Right, not a fixed 12:00 p.m. on a clock.
Exactly. But modern society has largely abstracted time into numbers, kind of divorcing it from the natural world. And this abstraction, while it's obviously convenient for industrial efficiency and scheduling everything, it can lead to this pervasive sense of disconnect from nature's rhythms. It can make us less attuned to the very planet we inhabit.
And then the Mescalero Apache worldview introduces an even more profound concept, one that really stretches our Western comprehension of reality: mythic time, or the mythic present. This is where it gets truly mind-bending.
It really does. Mythic time is described as neither cyclical nor linear. It simply is.
Mm.
It's not just a concept of time. It's almost conceived of as a place or maybe an event,
Yeah.
eternal dimension. It's where divine beings, foundational ideas, sacred stories reside with this timeless aspect. Yet they also possess their own distinct past and future, completely unrelated to our linear time.
Wow.
The really profound insight here is that for the Apache, these aren't just ancient tales or, abstract folklore. They are living realities. It makes you wonder as maybe our linear fixation on time blinds us to these richer parallel layers of existence that might be just as real, just as accessible, but through different means.
So how does one even interact with something so utterly distinct from our everyday experience? Is it like a state of mind or a physical place?
The source suggests that individuals can actually enter and exit mythic time, often through profound experiences or ceremonies, like a coming-of-age ritual. When you enter mythic time, you're not just thinking about or retelling stories, you are genuinely living with all of the things that the West considers to be folklore or mythology.
You're living with them.
Yes, it's an active, immersive experience that blurs the lines between what we perceive as history, myth, and present reality. It's an extraordinary example of how belief can shape temporal reality.
Okay, so how can we wrap our heads around that? Is there an analogy?
Well, the source offers a crude parallel, maybe helpful for a Western audience. Think of Mount Olympus in Greece.
Okay, yeah, the
It's
mountain.
a real physical mountain, right? You can hike it.
Yeah.
But the Mount Olympus, with gods living there, that's the mythic one. You can hike the physical mountain today, and you won't bump into Zeus or Hera because you're operating in our linear time.
Right.
But in mythic time, they are always there, eternally present. And that aspect of the mountain, the mythic one, can only be accessed in very specific ways, maybe through particular rituals or states of being or spiritual practices. It's not that the gods aren't really there. It's that they exist in a different concurrent temporal dimension, one that requires a different kind of perception to access.
What's clear from all these diverse perceptions is that time isn't just some abstract construct, is it? It's a dynamic force, deeply interwoven with our social structures, even our economic realities. It really challenges the notion of time as some universal constant.
Absolutely. And this profound fluidity in time perception naturally leads us to a crucial question. If time isn't just ours, but this shared continuum, how does our subjective experience of it then influence our sense of duty, our connection to the world around us?
Because that sense of duty, of responsibility, that's what drives how we interact with our communities and our planet.
And there's a fascinating perspective from a Reddit user, Aspect12, that expands on this. They argue that timekeeping systems might actually be more about pragmatic agricultural issues and practical needs than purely about ethnicity or abstract cultural beliefs.
That's a really compelling point. So not just culture, but the practical demands of life. Perspex 12 in their observations apparently identified 4 distinct internalized timekeeping systems, particularly around appointment keeping. And they found these cut across both Anglo and indigenous populations in Montana, which suggests that while cultural beliefs certainly play a role, practical needs like those dictated by, the biological realities of cows or crops might exert an even stronger influence on how we perceive and manage our time.
And these 4 types of appointment keeping offer a truly illuminating spectrum of temporal engagement. It's quite insightful. At one extreme, you have communities where appointments are seen as nothing less than blood oaths. Missing one is a grave offense, an unacceptable breach of trust.
Wow, high stakes.
Very high stakes. This precision is common in larger cities, where doctors, lawyers, highly structured environments operate with time monetized and precisely scheduled. Their schools run on strict periods. Every minute counts.
Okay, so that's one end. What else?
Then, moving along the spectrum, you get communities where appointments are more like dinner reservations. If you show up, great, you're served. If not, well, someone else gets your slot and life moves on.
A bit more flexible then.
Exactly. There's still an expectation to show up around a specific time, but it's less rigid. Then, further along, imagine appointments like 10 a.m. on Tuesday be interpreted simply as, I have an appointment sometime on Tuesday.
Ah, so the exact hour isn't the point.
Right. Arriving at any point that day fulfills the obligation. This reflects a different cultural understanding of precision versus flexibility.
And the last type.
And at the furthest end, you apparently encounter communities that don't even really have a concept of appointments at all. The whole idea of scheduling a fixed future moment for an interaction just isn't part of their way of life.
Fascinating. And Haruspex 12 connects this back to practical things.
Strongly suspects these variations are driven by deeply practical factors.
Hmm.
The type of agriculture in the area, reliance on migrant labor, local unemployment levels, stuff like that. For instance, as they point out, cows don't care that it is Tuesday or 10 a.m., but you have to milk them on a consistent schedule. That dictates a rigid sense of time.
Right, biological necessity.
Exactly. In contrast, migrants picking plants depend heavily on sunlight, on weather conditions, so their time is dictated more by natural rhythms. And someone who's persistently unemployed might not face the same external pressures to adhere to a rigid, externally imposed schedule.
This really brings home how deeply our environment, our economy, our social structures shape something as fundamental as time, and how different societies prioritize and interact with it based on their specific pragmatic needs. It's not just a clock on the wall, it's a reflection of an entire way of life, and it profoundly impacts our sense of collective responsibility.
Exactly. Which leads us right back to that question. If time is so fluid and culturally constructed, how does this influence our sense of duty, our connection to the world? Because that inherent sense of duty, of responsibility, that's what drives how we interact with our communities and our planet.
Okay, so how does this fluid understanding of time connect with our sense of responsibility? When we talk about social responsibility, what are we really getting at? Is it just about avoiding harm, or is there something, far more active, more intentional, involved in our obligations to each other and the wider world?
Social responsibility is a fascinating and really expansive concept because it stretches from our most individual choices, the small things we do every day, all the way up to vast global policies. At its core, it's about how we as individuals and as organizations work and cooperate for the benefit of the collective community. It demands this delicate but essential balance between often competing economic needs and the health of the ecosystem we all live within. It frequently involves trade-offs, doesn't it, between immediate economic development and the long-term welfare of society and the environment.
Yeah, that tension seems unavoidable.
It really is. And it's not just a concern for businesses, but for every single person whose actions, however small they seem, ripple out and impact the environment and others around them.
And this isn't some new idea born out of the industrial age or something. Our sources clearly trace the roots of social responsibility way back, through millennia of profound philosophical thought.
Absolutely. You look at ancient traditions, particularly in the classical Western philosophical tradition, they recognized its paramount importance for genuine human flourishing.
Like who, for example?
Well, think of Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher. He famously stated, "Man is by nature a political animal." For him, this wasn't just descriptive, it was prescriptive. He saw ethics and politics as these mutually reinforcing pillars of a good society. For Aristotle, a citizen developed virtues, things like magnificence and justice, not merely for personal gain or self-improvement, but primarily to contribute actively to making the polis, the city-state, an excellent and stable place where everyone could thrive.
So the individual's virtue served the collective good.
Inextricably linked. The purpose of the polis was, in turn, to provide fertile ground for a thriving, virtuous citizenry, a profound form of social responsibility right at the heart of their society.
And you see the same foundational principle echoed in ancient Rome too, right?
Absolutely. Cicero, the great orator and statesman, he believed that in no other realm does human excellence approach so closely the paths of the gods as it does in the founding of new and in the preservation of already founded communities.
Wow, comparing it to the gods.
It speaks to the almost sacred nature of building and maintaining a just, stable society, a truly divine endeavor in his view. And then there's the Stoic philosopher emperor Marcus Aurelius. He offered an equally powerful and concise insight that resonates so profoundly today. That which isn't good for the hive isn't good for the bee.
Simple, but powerful.
It's a clear, direct link between individual well-being and the health of the collective, emphasizing that our personal good is intrinsically tied to the good of the whole.
So these ancient ideas laid this profound philosophical groundwork. But the modern concept, especially in business?
Right. The modern origins of social responsibility, particularly as a distinct concept in the business world, are often traced to Howard Bowen's seminal 1953 book, Social Responsibility of the Businessman. That text really solidified the concept as a specific area of consideration, moving it beyond just general personal ethics into the realm of corporate and institutional accountability.
Okay, shifting from the collective responsibility of societies and corporations down to the individual level, let's talk about individual social responsibility, or ISR. Our sources highlight two distinct ways one can be socially responsible. Passively, just by avoiding harmful acts, like not polluting, not spreading misinformation.
Hmm.
Or actively by performing actions that deliberately advance social goals, like volunteering or advocating for justice. But it's not just about what you do or don't do right now, is it? ISR also seems to have this strong intergenerational aspect.
Oh, absolutely. Our actions today have profound consequences for our posterity, impacting the opportunities and challenges they will face. And they can also be more or less respectful of our ancestors and the legacies they bequeathed us. It's this continuous, interwoven thread through time.
And this individual responsibility often requires a certain kind of courage, doesn't it?
A rare kind, yes. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Nobel laureate and Soviet dissident, he introduces powerful concept of civil valor. He distinguished it sharply from military valor. He argued that society desperately needed this quiet yet potent bravery. He famously said, "We have forgotten another concept of civil valor, and that's all our society needs, just that, just that, just that."
Wow. What did he mean by that?
He was speaking of the moral strength to stand up for what's right in civilian life, to speak truth to power, to resist complicity even when it's difficult, unpopular, or puts you at risk. It's the courage to uphold ethical principles in the face of social pressure or just sheer convenience.
That's an incredibly powerful and relevant idea, especially now in our modern information age. Francisco Mejia Uribe argues that a crucial and maybe often overlooked part of ISR today is the diligent vetting of information.
Ah,
He
wow.
posits that we have a moral obligation to believe only what we have diligently investigated. And crucially, a profound responsibility not to pollute the well of collective knowledge by spreading unverified, false, or misleading information.
The stakes of just believing things without checking.
He argues they're simply too high in a world saturated with data, where misinformation can have devastating real-world consequences. It's an active, intellectual form of social responsibility that demands critical thinking from every single one of us.
And this intellectual and moral responsibility extends even more acutely to scientists and engineers. They bear a unique and heightened moral burden because of the profound impact their work can have. A critical question often posed is, are scientists and engineers morally responsible for the negative consequences that result from applications of their knowledge and inventions?
That's a tough one.
It is. If they rightfully take pride in positive achievements and breakthroughs, shouldn't they logically also accept some responsibility for negative or unintended consequences? Many professional societies in these fields have established ethical guidelines for research and engineering, signaling a shared collective responsibility that goes beyond that of the average citizen for how scientific knowledge is generated and used.
But there are significant practical and ethical challenges to actually holding people accountable in complex modern research and tech development,
Oh,
right?
definitely. One pervasive issue is the fragmentation and diffusion of responsibility.
Hmm.
Modern scientific work involves this immense division of labor, extremely high specialization, complex hierarchical decision-making, often involving numerous teams across different organizations.
So it's hard to pin down who's responsible.
It makes it incredibly difficult for any individual scientist or engineer to fully control or even foresee the ultimate applications and implications of their innovations. It often leads to situations where, as the source says, everybody involved was responsible, but none could be held responsible in a meaningful way.
What about the excuse that they just didn't know it would be misused?
That's another significant challenge, the ignorance of future abuse. Scientists and engineers genuinely can't always predict how their knowledge or innovations might be misused or weaponized down the line. Now, this excuse is certainly stronger for those involved in very basic, fundamental research, where the ultimate applications are truly unforeseen or far in the future.
But less so for applied research.
Much weaker, yes. For those engaged in applied research, where the objectives and potential uses are generally well known. As philosopher John Forge plainly puts it, ignorance is not an excuse, precisely because scientists can be blamed for being ignorant. The ethical expectation is that they should, to a reasonable degree, try to foresee at least some of the potential moral implications and misuses of their work, especially when the objectives are clear.
And then there's the money aspect, the funding.
Right, the argument, which you hear more and more, that responsibility often falls heavily on those who provide the funding. Modern experimental research, especially in fields like biotech or advanced AI, is incredibly expensive. Scientists become highly dependent on large corporations, government agencies, vast pools of taxpayer money. In this view, ultimate accountability for the uses and abuses of scientific advancements should partly rest with the funders, given their immense influence over research directions and priorities.
Okay, so shifting to the organizational level, let's talk about corporate social responsibility or CSR. What motivates businesses to engage in CSR? Is it purely altruistic?
Well, one of the pragmatic motivations is that ethical decision-making can actually prevent costly, intrusive government intervention. For instance, if a company actively follows or even proactively exceeds EPA guidelines, maybe engages with the community to address environmental concerns before they escalate.
They're less likely to get investigated.
Significantly less likely to face a costly and reputation-damaging investigation. The underlying idea is often that a lack of public outcry limits the pressure for new regulations. So proactive CSR can be a shrewd strategic move to maintain autonomy.
Of course, CSR isn't without its powerful critiques. People are often skeptical.
Very skeptical. Some argue it fundamentally distracts from a business's primary economic role, which is to generate profit for shareholders. Others view it as mere greenwashing, superficial efforts to appear environmentally friendly or socially conscious without genuine deep-seated commitment.
Or just trying to head off tougher laws.
Exactly. Or simply as a calculated attempt to preempt more stringent government oversight and regulation. These critiques often question the true motives behind CSR initiatives.
But does it actually benefit the companies beyond just PR?
Despite these valid critiques, quite a few studies actually demonstrate a slightly positive correlation with improved shareholder returns when firms genuinely and strategically engage in CSR. Furthermore, the roles of verification and reputation are increasingly significant. Independent certification processes from respected entities like Underwriters Laboratories or Green Seal help verify a company's social and environmental sustainability claims.
So consumers can trust it more.
It provides a tangible assurance that products meet certain ethical standards. And a strong reputation for CSR has been shown to lead to higher profits and significantly more positive consumer responses, particularly among those consumers who genuinely value helping others. These consumers often choose to reciprocate by actively supporting companies that demonstrate a commitment to doing good, provided, of course, they believe the firm's intentions are authentic.
It's incredible how these ethical threads weave through so many different levels of our lives, from individual decisions about what information we share, all the way up to the biggest corporations grappling with their environmental footprint. It truly highlights the profound interconnectedness of our actions and the ripple effects across society and, well, across time.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights that responsibility isn't just about avoiding harm or reacting to problems. It's about actively, intentionally contributing to the well-being of the collective, whether that's a local community, the global environment, or even future generations whom we may never meet. And this understanding leads us directly to perhaps the most profound and urgent aspect of our discussion today, our intergenerational compact with the planet.
Now, let's take everything we've explored, these diverse perceptions of time, the expansive nature of responsibility, and connect it to perhaps the most urgent challenge of our era, the fate of our planet. This is where these concepts truly hit home, isn't it? How does environmental philosophy help us understand our ethical obligations to something as vast and enduring as the Earth itself, especially when the scale of the challenge feels so immense?
Environmental philosophy provides an absolutely crucial lens. It compels us to fundamentally reevaluate our values and priorities in the face of escalating crises like climate change, mass biodiversity loss, resource depletion. The list goes on. It's about much more than just science or economics. It's about establishing deep ethical frameworks that guide how we should and morally must interact with the natural world. It powerfully shifts the conversation from merely managing resources to stewarding life itself, acknowledging our profound moral duties to the non-human world.
And at the core of environmental philosophy lies this fundamental, urgent question. Do we as human beings bear ethical responsibilities towards preserving the environment for the sake of present and future generations? This question is profound because it moves beyond purely human welfare, doesn't it? It delves into the intrinsic value of nature itself. It forces us to ask whether nature, a forest, a river, a species, has worth simply by existing, not just for what it can do for us or how it serves human needs.
Indeed. And the roots of environmental ethics, they actually trace back to ancient philosophical traditions that recognize this inherent value and interconnectedness long before the modern environmental movement. Aristotle, for instance, spoke of nature possessing an inherent tendency towards flourishing, a concept he called kalos-like, the inherent purpose or ultimate end towards which something strives. This implied an inherent order and value in the natural world.
So nature has its own goals, in a way.
In a way, yes. Similarly, Eastern philosophies like Taoism and Buddhism deeply emphasized harmony with nature and a profound reverence for all life forms, viewing humanity as part of a larger, interconnected web. So this isn't some modern invention. It's a powerful re-emphasis of ancient wisdom that perhaps got lost somewhere in the industrial age.
But the contemporary environmental ethics movement really gained significant momentum in the 20th century, didn't it? Catalyzed by growing public concerns over industrialization's visible impact.
Absolutely. Influential thinkers played truly pivotal roles in shaping this consciousness. Aldo Leopold, for example, a forester and conservationist, introduced his revolutionary land ethic. This radically extended moral consideration from just humans to the biotic community as a whole. The soil, waters, plants, animals, everything.
Challenging that human-centered view.
Completely. Challenged the deeply entrenched anthropocentrism that had long dominated environmental thought, asserting that ecosystems, not just individual species, were intrinsically valuable.
And others.
We also have figures like John Muir, the passionate naturalist and advocate for wilderness preservation. He argued forcefully for the intrinsic value of wilderness, pushing back against its exploitation purely for human gain. Then there's Rachel Carson. Her groundbreaking book, Silent Spring, published in 1962, served as this powerful wake-up call.
A classic.
Absolutely. It meticulously exposed the devastating effects of synthetic pesticides like DDT on ecosystems and human health. Her work sparked a nationwide environmental consciousness movement. It prompted a critical reevaluation of our ethical responsibilities towards the natural world, ultimately leading to significant policy changes. These thinkers, through their powerful ideas and advocacy, truly laid the groundwork for today's comprehensive environmental ethical frameworks.
Okay, so within this sprawling field, two distinct, often contrasting viewpoints have emerged. Anthropocentric, which is human-centered, and non-anthropocentric, which is nature-centered. Could you break down the core implications of each perspective?
Certainly. Anthropocentric perspectives fundamentally place human interests and welfare at the very center of moral consideration. From this viewpoint, environmental preservation is justified primarily, if not exclusively, by how it benefits humans.
So it's about us.
Essentially, yes. For example, utilitarian philosophers like Peter Singer and John Stuart Mill, who focus on maximizing overall well-being, would argue for environmental protection insofar as it minimizes suffering and maximizes human well-being. Similarly, sustainable resource management, from an anthropocentric view, focuses on ensuring natural resources are available for present and future human generations because of their instrumental value to human life and economy. Think of protecting water sources because they are essential for human survival and industry. It's about what nature can do for us.
So if I understand correctly, the anthropocentric view sees nature primarily as a resource to be managed wisely for human flourishing. But non-anthropocentric perspectives challenge that entirely, right? They seem to flip the script.
Precisely. Non-anthropocentric perspectives represent a significant and radical shift in moral consideration. They argue that every living thing has value in its own right, regardless of its utility to humans.
Value in itself.
Exactly. Intrinsic value. This means viewing ecosystems, species, natural processes as more than just resources. It leads to prioritizing biodiversity and healthy ecosystems for their own sake, ensuring future generations inherit a planet that's thriving, not just for human use, but because a thriving planet rich in biodiversity is inherently good and valuable in itself.
And within that non-anthropocentric view, there are even further distinctions, offering different levels of moral consideration.
Yes, exactly. For example, you have biocentrism, championed by thinkers like Paul Taylor. This asserts that all living beings possess inherent worth and should be granted equal moral consideration, regardless of their utility to humans.
So every living thing gets moral standing.
Yes, a tree, a squirrel, simply because it is alive. Then there's ecocentrism, advocated by Arnonnes and Aldo Leopold, which extends this moral consideration even further. It extends it to entire ecosystems and the intricate relationships within them. This perspective argues that ecological integrity should be preserved for its intrinsic value, meaning the health of a wetland or a complex forest ecosystem is valuable in itself, beyond just the individual plants or animals within it.
These aren't just academic distinctions, are they? They must profoundly impact decisions.
Oh, absolutely. They profoundly impact how we make development and conservation decisions, influencing everything from protected areas to climate policy.
This brings us to a really critical concept that bridges our discussion of time and responsibility: intergenerational justice. It's that powerful idea that our actions today have far-reaching impacts on the lives and well-being of those yet to come, our children, grandchildren, generations beyond. How do environmental ethics help us conceptualize this immense responsibility that spans across vast stretches of time?
It's an absolutely core component of modern environmental ethics. Philosopher Edith Brown Weiss introduced a foundational principle of intergenerational equity. It powerfully argues that each generation holds the planet in trust for future generations and has an obligation to pass it on in no worse condition than it was received.
Holding it in trust, that's a powerful image.
It is. It directly challenges the kind of short-term thinking that often dominates our economic and political decisions and compels us towards truly long-term stewardship. It implies a kind of collective inheritance, where we are temporary custodians, not ultimate owners, of the Earth.
And this naturally leads to the radical but increasingly accepted idea of rights for future generations.
Exactly. Philosophers like Brian Barry and Evner de Chalit argued compellingly that future generations have a legitimate claim to inheriting a habitable planet and access to natural resources. This imposes a clear, present ethical duty on the current generation to preserve these fundamental conditions. It's a heavy burden, certainly, but also a profound moral imperative.
Calling us to act as ancestors worthy of the future.
Well put, indeed. Environmental ethicists make a compelling and urgent case for our moral obligations to preserve a habitable planet. They highlight that the accelerating depletion of natural resources, the devastating loss of biodiversity, the far-reaching adverse impacts of climate change, these aren't just present problems, they pose existential threats not only to present life, but also to the well-being and survival of future generations.
So we have a clear moral imperative.
Yes, a clear moral imperative to mitigate these risks and safeguard the environmental conditions necessary for human flourishing in the years to come. This isn't just about sustainability, it's about justice across time.
So what do these profound philosophical ideals look like when translated into the messy reality of practical applications and policy implications? How do these deep ethical frameworks guide real-world decisions?
They provided an incredibly strong ethical foundation for a wide range of actions. For example, environmental protection and conservation efforts are deeply rooted in recognizing nature's intrinsic value. It's not just about saving a species because it might provide a new medicine for humans. It's about protecting it because it has inherent value in itself.
Right.
Similarly, sustainable development and resource management strategies are directly informed by the principles of intergenerational equity, ensuring responsible resource use for long-term sustainability, so future generations aren't left with a depleted planet.
And critically, climate change mitigation and adaptation measures, they're increasingly seen as a moral imperative.
Absolutely. This is due to the far-reaching and disproportionate impacts of climate change on vulnerable populations, future generations, and the entire planet's ecosystem. Environmental ethics provides the vital framework to evaluate policies, emission targets, adaptation strategies, ensuring they protect both human and ecological well-being, prioritizing the most vulnerable and those yet to come.
And finally, these ethical considerations are essential guides in all environmental decision-making.
Essential. They help us navigate complex dilemmas, balance competing interests, weigh the moral implications of different courses of action, and ultimately ensure that decisions are guided by principles of fairness, equity, and long-term sustainability. It's about making choices that acknowledge the inherent value of nature, the rights of future generations, and our profound role as responsible stewards, not just consumers, of the planet.
Yet, despite this comprehensive and compelling ethical framework, environmental ethics faces significant practical challenges and counterarguments in the real world. It's clearly not a simple, straightforward path to implementation.
Absolutely not. One of the primary and most persistent tensions is the perceived conflict between rigorous environmental preservation and the undeniable demands of economic development. Critics often argue that prioritizing environmental concerns too strictly might hinder human progress and well-being, particularly in developing nations.
Where poverty alleviation is paramount.
Exactly. Where economic development is often seen as essential for alleviating poverty, improving living standards, fostering social stability. This creates a deeply difficult balancing act. How do you achieve both?
Another fundamental challenge is the complex, often agonizing task of balancing present and future needs and interests. How do we equitably distribute resources and opportunities across generations when the needs of the present feel so urgent?
It's a huge dilemma. Some argue that prioritizing future generations might place undue burdens on the present, potentially hindering current economic growth or quality of life. Others contend with equal passion that safeguarding the planet's long-term habitability must take precedence, as there will be no present if the future is unlivable.
A deeply dated and morally charged ethical dilemma.
With no easy answers. And then there's the pervasive issue of uncertainty and risk assessment in environmental decision-making. We often grapple with significant scientific uncertainties, for example, the precise long-term impacts of human activities on complex ecosystems or the exact localized consequences of global climate change.
We don't know everything.
Precisely. Critics express legitimate concern that acting too aggressively on incomplete evidence could lead to unintended consequences or disproportionate economic and social costs, perhaps even hindering the very human progress it seeks to enable. This highlights the inherent difficulty of making irreversible, high-stakes decisions with imperfect information.
This leads us to a powerful, maybe even unsettling observation from the renowned novelist Amitav Ghosh in his book, The Great Derangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable. He uses this stark, provocative phrase, the Great Derangement. It's not just a critique of politics or science, it's an intellectual and imaginative critique of our entire contemporary moment.
What's truly compelling and, chilling about Ghosh's argument is his assertion that future generations might well look back at us and see us as deranged. He attributes this profound failure not just to a scientific or political inability to act, but more fundamentally to an imaginative failure.
An imaginative failure.
Yes, a failure to truly grasp the scale and violence of climate change. He suggests we simply cannot seem to adequately imagine what's happening and what it truly means for our future, culturally speaking.
And this imaginative failure extends across the very fabric of our culture. He critiques literature, history, politics.
Exactly. He meticulously critiques how our most influential forms of expression have largely grappled with climate change, or often failed to. He notes, for instance, that serious high literary fiction tends to conspicuously avoid climate change as a central theme. Why?
Because it feels too unreal.
Perhaps because, as he puts it, 100-year storms and freakish tornadoes simply feel too improbable for the novel, consigning such cataclysmic events to other genres like science fiction or fantasy, rather than integrating them as realistic, urgent contemporary issues demanding serious contemplation in our mainstream narratives.
And history and politics.
In history, he argues, the complex, tangled history of the carbon economy is often dangerously simplified, obscuring the systemic forces at play. And in politics, the climate crisis has often devolved into a matter of personal moral reckoning, individual choices about recycling or carbon footprints.
Instead of collective action.
Right, rather than an arena for robust, systemic collective action. This pervasive focus on individual guilt or virtue, he contends, comes at a great cost. It diverts crucial attention and energy from the systemic collective action truly required to address a crisis of this magnitude.
Ghosh ultimately argues that the climate crisis demands nothing less than imagining other forms of human existence, doesn't he?
Yes, a truly profound task for which fiction, paradoxically, is uniquely suited. He's saying that by limiting our cultural narratives, by failing to confront climate change within our central stories, we tragically limit our collective ability to envision genuine solutions and alternative ways of living.
So the climate crisis is also a crisis of culture, of imagination.
That's his core message, profoundly unsettling. The climate crisis is also a crisis of culture, and thus the imagination. This emphasizes the urgent need for entirely new artistic, literary, political frameworks to comprehend and confront the immense challenge before us. It forces us to ask, are we failing to solve this not just due to politics or science, but because our shared cultural narratives simply aren't equipped to help us imagine the scale of the threat, let alone our collective way out?
Yeah. It really challenges us to consider if our cultural narratives, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what's possible, are actually helping or hindering our collective ability to act responsibly towards the future. Are we telling ourselves stories that empower us to change or ones that allow us to remain complacent, clinging to outdated paradigms? It's a call to profound cultural introspection. Okay, this discussion of broad philosophical and ethical obligations can understandably feel a bit overwhelming, almost too immense to grasp in our daily lives. So what does it look like to practically embrace this powerful idea of stewardship in our own lives, both as individuals and maybe within the teams or communities we're part of? How do we move from these grand abstract concepts to the tangible steps we can take today in our own finite minutes?
This is truly where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? And our sources offer incredibly tangible ways to move from abstract concepts to intentional, actionable behaviors. They help us understand how to, as one writer puts it, run your timer down as best as you possibly can, meaning to live each moment with purpose and awareness. It's about translating these deep philosophical understandings into practical actions and structures that consciously shape our daily lives and our collective efforts.
Let's start with personal temporal stewardship. This concept is introduced by David C. Wells, Jr. He defines it as being consciously aware of where we stand in the passage of time, how the past intersects with the present, and how the future will receive the output of our actions.
It's a profound acknowledgement that our individual timeline isn't isolated but part of a much larger intergenerational flow.
And he points out a common human tendency, which he provocatively labels a narcissistic view of time. What does he mean by that?
He means where our actions primarily focus on our own personal experience of time, our immediate desires, our present comfort, and we don't adequately consider how those actions may shape a future beyond ourselves. This kind of tunnel vision on the present moment, on our immediate gratification, often prevents us from truly seeing and appreciating the profound ripple effects of our choices across generations.
He uses a vivid image to counter this narrow view. Time, he says, looks more like the overlapping scales of a fish.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Our individual timelines aren't separate linear paths distinct from others. Rather, they're like individual scales that intimately overlap and intertwine with those who came before us and those who will come after. Even if we're not directly experiencing the future, our present actions are inextricably linked to it, leaving an undeniable mark on the scales that follow.
So, to practice good temporal stewardship, Wells outlines 3 essential requirements. What are they?
First, we must learn to consciously balance present and future benefits. He illustrates this with a relatable example. A new retiree who needs to carefully balance spending for present enjoyment like travel or hobbies against ensuring sufficient funds remain for a comfortable future quality of life.
A common dilemma.
Absolutely. Similarly, aggressively hard living when young, excessive indulgence or neglecting health has profound long-term implications that can severely limit choices and well-being later in life. This balance, he emphasizes, is a critical skill to learn in balancing these competing considerations.
Okay, balance present and future. What's second?
Second, we must proactively put the past into appropriate context and occasionally put it to bed. This means bravely acknowledging how deeply personal and even generational baggage, ingrained habits or unspoken assumptions inherited from the past can dramatically shape our lives in the present.
Facing the ghosts.
Exactly. Facing these ghosts, as he calls them, past traumas, inherited limitations, unexamined narratives. It can be incredibly difficult, often requiring professional help and deep introspection. And for those inheriting generational cycles of poverty or dysfunction, Wells notes that it can truly be a life's work to critically examine and consciously change these narratives, hopefully freeing future generations from their grip.
That's huge. And the third requirement?
Third, and perhaps the most subtly challenging, we must hold on to the present with a firm but not crushing grip. This involves a wise recognition that while our fundamental core beliefs are crucial, there's a pervasive human temptation to elevate secondary beliefs. Those ideas or habits that were once helpful but may now be outdated or limiting to truth with a capital T.
Clinging to things that don't serve us anymore.
Precisely. This rigidity, this clinging to what once worked, can severely hinder our adaptation to a changed world. By consciously placing the intensity and immensity of the present moment into its proper, broader context, acknowledging the past that led to it and the future it shapes, we can actually bring a profound lightness to our experience, freeing ourselves from undue pressure and allowing for greater flexibility and wisdom.
This naturally leads us to the philosophy and ethics of punctuality, which at first glance might seem trivial, like just a social nicety. But as Phil McKinney, a seasoned business leader, powerfully argues, it's deeply tied to how we value time itself.
He posits that time is our most valuable resource, far more precious than money, precisely because it is absolutely finite. It cannot be saved, paused, or rewound. Each day offers a non-negotiable 1,440 precious minutes, and once they're gone forever.
And McKinney vividly highlights a common frustration in the modern workplace meetings.
Oh, yes. We've all been there.
He points out how often they start late, drag on unnecessarily, are frequently scheduled for an hour when 20 or 30 minutes would be more than sufficient.
He recounts this brilliant experiment by a chief people officer who actually calculated the exact worth of an hour meeting for the executive team. In terms of aggregated salaries,
That was a big number.
astronomically astounding, apparently. It immediately prompted teams to critically question the true value of discussing certain agenda items in large groups. It led them to actively delegate decisions to smaller, more efficient groups, ensuring a far more effective and respectful handling of collective time, a very practical application of truly valuing time.
McKinney unequivocally sees punctuality as a strong predictor of success. Why?
He argues it fundamentally demonstrates reliability and accountability. While external factors like unexpected traffic or sudden weather changes can certainly impact punctuality, he stresses that internal factors like poor time management, lack of preparation, or even a lack of motivation or respect for others' time are often the true culprits.
He even shares a fascinating, maybe slightly disturbing anecdote about ethical time from a sci-fi story.
Yeah, in this fictional world, lateness literally deducts from your life expectancy, and in a grim twist, adds that stolen time to the life expectancy of those who were on time.
Whoa, that would change things.
Profoundly alters the perception of time's value, making every minute a moral transaction. It certainly makes you think differently about being 5 minutes late, doesn't it?
It really does. And McKinney applies this philosophy of radical punctuality in his own leadership.
Yes, as a CEO, turning it into a cornerstone of his professional relationships. He makes it a consistent habit to call each board member individually 2 weeks before meetings, always initiating the call at the exact scheduled time down to the second. This unwavering, consistent punctuality, maintained over more than a decade, has built an incredibly strong culture of respect, reliability, and trust with his board members.
So they trust him with their time.
Implicitly, they know their time is valued and respected. So when he requests just 15 minutes, their office consistently grants it, no questions asked. Because they trust he will be punctual, prepared, and will honor their time by making every minute count. It's a powerful demonstration of how valuing time builds social capital.
He offers 3 practical, essential tips for time management. They seem basic, but maybe profound reminders.
They are. First, he advises to focus on the right tasks. Using tools like the Eisenhower matrix helps you categorize and prioritize urgent and critical tasks while delegating or even ignoring less significant ones.
Okay, focus.
Second, he urges us to learn to delegate work. Overcoming that often ingrained belief that I have to do it all myself is crucial. Delegating tasks not only frees up your own precious time for more important strategic stuff, but also fosters teamwork, builds capacity in others, and distributes responsibility more effectively.
And third, the counterintuitive one.
Right, perhaps the most counterintuitive in our always-on culture. The vital need to take time to recharge. Taking intentional breaks, including extended vacations, is not a luxury, but an absolute necessity. It is crucial for our creativity and productivity. It enhances efficiency, improves focus, reduces stress, and critically prevents burnout. These aren't just personal benefits. They directly contribute to overall effectiveness and responsible engagement.
Okay, building on that, Oleg Kazantsev offers a truly crucial distinction for teams. Management versus stewardship of time. It sounds like more than just semantics.
Oh, it's far more. It represents a fundamental shift in leadership philosophy and approach. In Kazantsev's view, traditional management is primarily about administration and control, optimizing workloads, eradicating waste, rigorously controlling risks. Think of, Henry Ford's assembly lines, or highly structured methodologies like Six Sigma or waterfall project management. The core goal is control over processes, predictable outcomes.
Okay, control. And stewardship.
Stewardship, however, is a profoundly different paradigm. It's about nurture and empowerment. It focuses on how leaders truly control or empower people by focusing on the way they handle time, processes, and value. It shifts from a top-down command and control approach to one that fosters growth, autonomy, and untapped human potential.
He then ingeniously applies Maslow's hierarchy of needs to time, creating a temporal hierarchy of needs for teams. How does that work?
It's a great framework. The foundation, the most basic need, is simply time on task. Having enough time, not just to complete tasks, but to do them well, without feeling rushed or overwhelmed. When people are constantly rushed, they feel stressed, inadequate, demotivated, feeling on fire, or walking the plank, as he puts it.
We've all felt that.
Absolutely. But when given sufficient time, it brings a profound sense of closure and accomplishment.
Okay, that's the base. What's next up?
The second level is mission autonomy. This vital sense of executive safety and self-agency in how one approaches their work. Micromanagement, that pervasive lack of trust, actively undermines this autonomy. and frequently leads to procrastination and disengagement.
Whereas trust empowers people.
Exactly. When leaders demonstrate genuine trust and grand autonomy, it empowers individuals to assume greater responsibility and ownership over their work. Once these foundational needs, time on task and mission autonomy, are met, then you can begin to cultivate the higher order needs.
Which are?
Next up is recovery and rest. Kazantsev argues this is absolutely essential for a healthy team culture. This isn't just taking a quick break. It's about providing time to genuinely rest, recover, celebrate, and acknowledge the humanity of everyone after a period of intense work. And crucially, he emphasizes, this must be natural and self-regulated, not another scheduled chore or mandatory fun activity. Real rejuvenation.
Makes sense. Then learning.
The fourth level is learning and insight. Kazantsev notes that curiosity is often described as active boredom, highlighting that without sufficient unstructured time, true curiosity and deeper learning are stifled. This level represents dedicated time to level up knowledge, explore new ideas, or mentor others. It's distinct from mandatory training, where agency is often lacking. And the peak? Finally, at the peak is introspection. This is where individuals can discover profound personal growth and truly untap our own dormant potential. This often occurs during non-mandatory retreats, parental leave, sabbaticals, periods of intentional reflection away from the daily grind. He emphasizes that employer support for flexibility and these higher-order needs leads to highly productive strength-matching roles within the organization. Conversely, rigidity and a failure to meet these needs inevitably drive talented employees to seek fulfillment and growth elsewhere.
He also connects this framework to McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y of management.
Yes, showing how leadership style profoundly impacts time stewardship. Theory X represents negative motivation, characterized by the directive, do it this way or else. This approach is often driven by risk avoidance, compliance. It can be fast initially, but performance often slows when the threat disappears, typically motivating just enough work to avoid punishment. This style primarily focuses on fulfilling the lower-level needs, time on task and mission autonomy, in their more functional, healthy forms, ideally.
And Theory Y.
Theory Y, or positive motivation, embodies the approach, let me carry the water for you so that you could focus on opportunities. This leadership style is driven by a profound desire to meet employees' higher-order needs, their desire for growth, contribution, self-actualization. It activates gradually, but once engaged, it keeps going fast, consistently motivating creativity, aspiration, a deeper sense of responsibility. This approach actively strives to improve and foster recovery and rest, learning and insight and introspection within the team culture, leading to truly empowered and innovative environments.
And Kazantsev provides a practical way to apply this, working the causality chain backwards.
Right. First, you define the product the team is working on. Is it something requiring high creativity, maybe Theory Y, or something needing strict adherence to security protocols, maybe Theory X? Second, you decide the desired condition for the team. Are you facing a missed deadline? That might call for a Theory X response temporarily. Are your products becoming unimaginative? That signals the need for a Theory Y approach.
And finally, you structure time accordingly.
Exactly. Based on the product and the desired condition, leaders must thoughtfully structure time. This involves deliberately designing the team culture and methodology, from establishing routines for critical tasks to implementing things like no-meeting Fridays or dedicated innovation sprints. It's a conscious, intentional design of how time's experienced, utilized, and valued within a team, fundamentally shaping its effectiveness, creativity, and overall well-being.
This gives you really concrete ways to think about how you operate, whether it's your own personal schedule and priorities or how you lead a team and foster a productive, respectful environment. It's about moving from simply managing minutes to stewarding moments with intention and purpose, recognizing the broader impact.
Precisely. This demonstrates how critical thinking about time, not just as a finite resource but as a profound human experience, can translate directly into more effective and ethically grounded practices. It allows for a more holistic, human-centered, and ultimately more responsible approach to productivity, well-being, and collective flourishing.
Wow. We've journeyed today from ancient philosophical insights on social responsibility all the way to the profound wisdom of indigenous cultures about time, through the complex ethical dilemmas of our environmental impact, and finally into the practicalities of stewarding our own finite minutes. We've seen how our relationship with time isn't just personal, it's deeply cultural, profoundly ethical, and holds immense implications for our collective future.
Yeah, the sources really reveal that how we perceive and manage time is inextricably linked to our deepest sense of obligation. whether that's a sacred duty to our ancestors, a living responsibility to our present community, or a profound commitment to the generations yet to come. And Amitav Ghosh's unsettling concept of the great derangement starkly reminds us of that imaginative leap required to truly face long-term challenges, emphasizing that it's collective action, not just individual moral reckoning, that will determine our fate, and highlighting how our very cultural narratives shape our ability to respond. From Seneca's Stoic call to seize time, to these modern concepts of temporal stewardship for individuals and teams, the underlying message seems crystal clear. Intentionality matters profoundly. Living with a conscious awareness of time's transience and our interwoven responsibilities can lead not only to richer, more meaningful lives for us today, but also a more just and sustainable future for all.
Hmm.
It's not just about what we achieve, but how we engage with every moment, and how that engagement impacts the entire interconnected web of existence, human and non-human alike.
So as you reflect on this deep dive, consider this. If, as Seneca wisely advised, what flies past has to be seized at. What are you seizing today that will truly honor the past you've inherited, profoundly enrich the present moment you occupy, and most importantly, shape a future that awaits not just you, but all of us on this shared planet?